Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. The French novelist André Malraux said, "Man is not what he thinks he is. He is what he hides." And sometimes in the case of a nation like Greece, it is what others attempt to hide. Insolvency, bankruptcy, bust. No can pay. No money. No God, no money. We're broke. We're broke. We're broke. Stacey?
Max.
Yeah.
Yes, we're back from Mexico. You took all these weeks to just come up with that.
That's it.
And we went via New York where there was a fake blizzard.
Oh, that fake blizzard was a joke.
But nowhere is more fake than here in London. We've been hit with propaganda, anti-Russia propaganda, anti-Greece propaganda.
What about that Guardian piece?
Exactly. But we're going to talk about Greece now because this is the big story of this first half, because one thing that happened when we were away, as a frequent guest of Keiser Report, Yanis Varoufakis has become like this rock star of Greece. Apparently, when he showed up for the first day of work at the finance ministry in Greece, he's a new finance minister, there were thousands of screaming girls, according to The Guardian, just screaming as he showed up. Well, he has the establishment certainly screaming in a very condescending way, and they don't want to, they're angry at his honesty, his truth-telling. The headline reads, "New finance minister says Greece is insolvent." And he was interviewed by Emily Matlis of BBC Newsnight. And in it, he explained that why they're renegotiating, what they want to talk to their European partners about, and is that basically he's saying, like, I'm like a bankrupt friend, pretend, and I have a credit card. People want to keep on giving me loans. But he said, quote, "Would you advise them that they should continue to take these tranches of loans from the credit card in order to deal with what is essentially an insolvency problem?" And as Francis Coppola notes, Emily Matlis didn't follow up on that. She didn't even pick up on the fact that here's the finance minister saying Greece is insolvent. This is the issue. Nobody has mentioned this. Nobody wants to say it.
Yeah, well, it is an insolvency issue, and the BBC completely glossed over it. And Lehman Brothers was an insolvency issue. RBS was an insolvency issue. HSBC was an insolvency issue. Barclays Bank is an insolvency issue. They position it as a liquidity issue that requires bailouts. And those bailouts are financed by central bank interest rates at zero or now negative interest rates. 16% of all the world's sovereign debt is now producing negative interest rates. And Yanis, over there, finance minister of Greece, is bringing to the fore a truth that has been ignored now since 2008. That, one, the global economy is bankrupt. Two, banks like Barclays, HSBC, Lloyds, RBS are technically insolvent. They are insolvent institutions. The Bank of England is also insolvent. The Federal Reserve Bank is insolvent. So Greece is saying, you guys are insolvent, and we're also insolvent, but you want to pay your rolling zombie bank debt by selling off our assets in a highly destructive way. Remember, Goldman Sachs was in there, destroyed Greece for the benefit of John Paulson, the hedge fund, and Papadreas, who was caught stealing funds. So he makes a good point, and he's in the catbird seat because he is dealing in reality, and these other guys are dealing in fantasy.
Well, just to put this into context, less than 10% of all those so-called bailout funds actually went to Greece. The rest, about 90%, went to those banks of France, of Germany, of other nations where they would have been the ones that were insolvent.
The creditors were bailed out.
The creditors were bailed out. Even JP Morgan notes that. JP Morgan noted that only 15 billion euros of the 410 billion, some of that was then lowered, but of that, only 15 billion went to Greece. So
look, I've been on the TV with Yanis many times on many networks and interviewed him on many of my own shows. And we've been talking about this for 6 years. So it should be no surprise that Osborne and Cameron and Merkel, the truth that he is speaking, the only reason they'd be shocked by this is because they live in a deluded world of BBC propaganda, where they think these banks are not insolvent. That's the direct result of BBC propaganda. Now, Yanis is saying, shatter your propaganda and understand that we're in the catbird seat, and if Germany doesn't take our debt, renegotiate our debt, we'll go to Russia. Russia will be happy to renegotiate their debt.
So let's turn to what Francis Coppola says about this. So everyone knows Greece is insolvent, of course, but no one has ever stated it officially. The Troika's position is that Greece's problem is a temporary liquidity shortfall. Lending it more money so it can meet current debt service obligations is justified because structural reforms will lead to renewed growth and increased income, enabling it to meet its obligations, including those for the new loans in the future. But Varoufakis disagrees with this interpretation. His view is that while things remain as they are, Greece will never recover. The bailout program locks it into a debt deflationary spiral, which simultaneously reduces its income and increases its debt burden. Continuing to accept more loans in order to meet debt service obligations only makes matters worse. So this is the truth of what he's seeing and what he's saying. And you mentioned Papandreou. Actually, his name is Papandreou. And this is one of the things that also Emily Matslis and the BBC are very upset about, is that apparently for the first time since democracy returned post 1974, this is the first time a Papandreou has not been in the government. So we'd like, our establishment media likes the Clintons, likes the Bushes, likes these family oligarchies that are in power, and only they have the legitimacy to go and renegotiate debt or not renegotiate debt, as it were.
Right. Well, look, BBC is a state-run media outlet that presents the views of the British state first and foremost. They're not impartial.
Well, there's
That's
loads
absurd.
of state media. RT is a state media. BBC is state media. France 24 is state media. Al Jazeera is state media.
Yeah, well,
so
look, Stacey, in The Guardian today, there's an editorial saying that the BBC needs to be propagandized for murdering Russian people. This was an editorial in today's Guardian, that the BBC should propagandize to murder Russians, just like they did to propagandize to murder Iraqis. That's absurd.
So you're talking about Timothy Garton-Ash, and he's talking about we need to have a war. So a violent conflict with guns. So, but let's talk about this financial war that has been going on in Greece. And again, here we turn to a tweet from Philippe Legrain, and he's the author of European Spring, Why Our Economies and Politics Are in a Mess and How to Put Them Right. And he tweets this about the situation that we see in front of us, that you and I see, that most people see, but the likes of the mainstream media, and the BBC is state media, but they're mainstream media. CNN is mainstream media. These are the guys that take the corporate position, what the corporatocracy and the oligarchy of our states want them to present. So he's saying Germans need to be told the truth, that their loans to Greece were primarily bailouts of its creditors, notably German banks. So the German population, is what he's saying, are basically, because they're not being told the truth. Merkel is in a position where she cannot act honestly in a situation. It's just a contractual issue.
And one of the things that we need to get clear is that when a bond lender, when somebody loans money via a bond offering, a Wall Street bank, a City of London bank, a government, if that bond cannot be paid by the borrower, both parties are equally culpable or equally involved in this transaction, in this contract. That's why in the bond market, there's something called the interest rate, and the interest rate is tied to risk. Now, the loans that were made to Greece were done so at an interest rate commensurate with the risk. The fact that Greece can't pay, you have two parties. The Greek government is now renegotiating that debt, and the people who made those loans have to accept the fact they have to cowboy up, they have to man up and say, we made a bad bet. The state and the people do not bail out bankers like they did in Ireland shamelessly.
Well, in fact, I would disagree that they were paid for the risk. Everybody notes that, well, Greece was lucky to join the euro, because what happened when they joined the euro is that their interest rates on their sovereign bonds went down. Is that the fault of Greece, or is it the fault of the lenders who mispriced that risk? They assumed Germany would bail them out. That's why they were willing to lend to Greece at 4% rather than, say, 10 or 11 or 12%, which would have compensated them for the risk.
Well, they've been right in that they coerced the ECB, which is the old Bundesbank, the German central bank, and Mario Draghi, he said, as we predicted on the show 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 6 months ago, and 3 months ago, that he would acquiesce and he would open the ECB balance sheet up to €1 trillion of new debt.
Yes, we
okay,
did.
Everyone
You
said
said
that
yes.
was never going to happen. We said it was a dead certainty it would happen. And this is what the PIMCO bond traders of the world are banking on, is that they can go to a place like Davos, take Mario Draghi in the back room, put a gun to his head, and say, take $1 trillion in debt, we're going to blow your brains all over the ceiling. Like that was done with Corzine and Jamie Dimon. Remember, Jamie put a gun to Corzine's head and say, either give us our $1 billion or your brains are on the ceiling. That's pretty well known and documented at this point. So,
well, rhetorically, yes. So let's also talk about the fact that you said that there are two parties to a contract. But in this case of Greece, in the case of Ireland, what is truly happened is that the individual citizens of the nation were not party to the contract, and yet they're being held responsible. And this is why we see these anti-austerity protests around the world, is because people realize they're being made to pay for private contracts done between the likes of Bill Gross. And I say Bill Gross not necessarily because I know that he's individually involved in these, but he ran PIMCO, which is the largest bond fund in the world, or was the largest bond fund in the world. So these are like the smartest guys in the room, very well compensated, paid hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Presumably, for their compensation, they understand the risk they are taking with their investors' money. And here we have elected officials, sometimes unelected officials across Europe, who are taking on these debts for their nation. And in the case of Greece, we're hiding it with the help of Goldman Sachs, which used some various interest rate swaps and credit default swaps to hide all their debt. Well, here, the citizens, the taxpayers, are not party to these contracts. They don't know who was taking on this debt and what their responsibilities were.
Look, there's a huge lawsuit in Greece against Goldman Sachs by the Lawyers Association in Greece. I spoke to them a few years ago and gave a presentation about why Goldman Sachs is culpable in these financial act of terrorism and that they should be sued. And I hope that they follow up on that lawsuit, because Goldman Sachs' fingerprints are all over this collapse. And Yanis Varoufakis...
Well, that's what we said, is like what right now everybody's strong-arming Greece into paying them for these, the bondholders for paying these debts, the bailout and stuff. But you and I were saying when we were watching this on BBC Newsnight is, why aren't people going to Goldman Sachs? Goldman Sachs is the one that engineered the lie, the original lie. You're talking about what's hidden is what is the truth about a country, and what was hidden, who hid it, was Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs hid Greece's debt. It wasn't the fault of anybody but Goldman Sachs in terms of people not understanding the risk they were taking.
Right, and of course the BBC doesn't go down that path because they're a state-run propagandist in bed with the corporations. I mean, that point needs to be made because everyone's pushing them as being some impartial global voice of sanity, but they're not. They're
Max, we have to go to the second half. Go to the second half. I'm staying.
Stay tuned for the second half. A whole lot more. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. I'm here with Stacey Herbert. So, yeah, we're talking about Greece. Greece shouldn't be a shock to anyone. It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. We've been saying this for years. They are an insolvent country, but so are the banks that made loans to Greece. The thing that Greece has is they've got huge income-producing assets, they've got a huge tourist industry, they've got a great economy, and they're going to survive and thrive post-apocalypse, financial apocalypse. And, you know, it's just, this is not a surprise. Anyone who thinks it's a surprise hasn't been watching the news.
And so we were talking about what is hidden and how that defines what a person is. And in the case of Greece, it's insolvent and debts were hidden. Now we're going to turn to America, where there's a similar story of unwittingly bankrupt people. And this is, while Deflategate and Chategate rage, America quietly robs its elderly. And this is Matt Taibbi, and he's in the Rolling Stone magazine, and he's talking about the Ferris wheel of conflicted payments. And so apparently many Americans don't realize, it might surprise a lot of Americans to know that most brokers handling retirement funds aren't required by law to act in the best interest of their clients. So they don't have to act in your best interest. You give them money, and they don't actually have to work toward making you more money. In fact, their primary obligation is often, in fact, to make themselves more money. So they might put you, for example, in some sort of investment in which they're receiving a huge kickback.
Yeah, okay. Do you want my comment on this?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, I worked as a stockbroker for many years. I worked for Payne Weber, Oppenheimer & Company, Shearson Lehman Hutton, and Alex Brown. And they are all exactly the same. They pay brokers based on return on assets, which they define as the percentage of a client's accounts you convert into a commission. Okay? Listen to what I just said. If you give me $1 million to manage, I get paid, I'm compensated by what percentage of that $1 million I can turn into a commission fee. Okay? Now, a good broker at any of these firms will convert 5 to 6% of an asset of a customer into a commission. That they churn them, they burn them, they pilfer like they do at Jamie Dimon. Does this every day, except he does it on a global basis. And they love him for it. And then an excellent broker will steal 10% or churn 10% or convert 10% of that client money into a commission, into a fee. That's how they're paid. That's how they're structured. It never, ever, ever in any conversation I've ever had in my years and years as a stockbroker with all those major firms did anyone ever ask, are the customers making money? As a matter of fact, there's a standard industry joke called, where are the customers' yachts? The brokers have the yachts. The customers get kicked in the teeth.
And so this was actually presented to Barack Obama. They wrote that back on January 13th, Jason Furman, the chairman of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors, issued a scathing memo about shady broker practices and how they impact ordinary savers, especially working people who use brokers to manage their retirement funds. So none of the media covered it. Instead, they covered this. There was a football game, an American football, and some deflate gate. They said the ball was deflated and it made the Patriots win. Whatever. That was what people were focusing on, not the deflation of your retirement fund. And they mentioned this churning. And Matt Taibbi compares it to the Wolf of Wall Street. There's a scene where Leonardo DiCaprio joins this brokerage firm, and Matthew McConaughey plays his boss. And he says, you know, there's 3 ways to succeed as a broker. 1 is a vulgar thing. 2 is cocaine, and 3 is revolution. Revolution, not in the way of these anti-austerity protests or Arab Springs or uprisings, but what the revolution is churning. Put them on a Ferris wheel and keep churning your clients and turning and turning and turning revolution into and out of investments that aren't in their best interest, but in our best interest.
Well, Wall Street in the 80s covered the same material. Boiler Room. There's another movie, 10 or 15 years later, covered the same area. Wolf of Wall Street covered the same topic. Okay, for the past 30 years, we've known that brokers churn and steal money from clients. And here's why it never goes anywhere. Occasionally, a broker will sue their brokerage firm or their broker. And then you have 2 responses. Number 1, you give them shares in a hot IPO. That's why IPOs are priced at 20 or 30 or 40% discount to what they could get if they priced it correctly, because they use that first day pop as a payola to keep litigious clients quiet. That's why you see all those one-day pops on IPOs. They're used as payola to keep litigious clients quiet. Number 2, if a client won't take the bribe from the brokerage firm in the form of a hot IPO and they want to go to court, well, when you sign a new customer account at any one of these brokerage firms, you sign up to binding arbitration. You can't go to a court of law and face a jury. You must go to arbiters. And those arbiters are made up of brokers and bankers. That's why I read a study a couple of years ago, for every $1,000 that's stolen from clients through the practices that you're talking about, less than $1 is recovered, because they face a panel of brokers who, of course, side with the brokerage firm.
And of course, that's part of the TPP and the TTIP sort of deals. These sovereigns want to sign up to the same exact sort of arbitration where they'll always be guaranteed to lose.
But let's tie this to Greece for a second. Greece is the victim, just like a customer of one of these firms featured in one of these films is a victim. They were sold crap from Goldman Sachs that bankrupted the nation. And what is their recourse? They had to go to the Troika, which is an arbitration panel made up of shysters.
Yeah.
And they got no redress. So now they elected a new government, and the BBC and other outlets will say they're far left, they're radical, they won't pay the bondholders, and pure propaganda, even though they're the ones who have been victimized, the Greek people, just like the people in Spain have been victimized. The people in Ireland have been so unmercifully victimized by the Troika and other scallywags in the banking industry, it makes the Catholic pedophile church scandal look lame by comparison.
So they also talk about this practice of churning. So the memo that was given to President Obama, the particular practice of making a client pay endlessly for transaction fees within the fund, known as churning, is described as a serious problem, one in which brokers, quote, repeatedly buy and sell assets when additional transactions aren't necessary, while exhibiting poor market timing. But as you've said, too, this wasn't covered in the President Obama's memo, is that they intentionally do that. They put on the trades early in the morning. The losing ones they dump in their clients, and the winning ones they keep for themselves or their favored clients.
Well, look, the fact is that, as Warren Buffett will tell you, the most successful investor in history, he gets maybe 3 or 4 good ideas a year. That's it. That's the most he can hope for. A stockbroker, to keep going, has to come up with 3 or 4 ideas a day. They'll call the same client 3 times a day with 3 great ideas. Statistically, that's impossible. And every time you lose, you enter in what's called the arithmetic of losing. If you lose 10% in an account, you have to make way more than 10% on the remaining funds to get back to even. So you take more risk, which of course means you're going to even lose more money. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is that, as you point out, you engage in fraud in a couple of different ways. People don't understand where these commissions come from. They call up, for example, the over-the-counter desk or the OTC desk, which is a syndicate of NASDAQ professionals who make markets and stocks. And you take down, let's say, 500,000 shares at a price that is distributed throughout the firm. But then when you call customers, they mark it up, essentially, on the NASDAQ. And they create a fake price. And the difference is essentially a commission. So the broker would take, sometimes the customer gets a confirm, which shows you bought stock at $12. They don't understand that the desk at the firm, whether it's Oppenheimer or JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs, they bought it at $10 and they just marked it up 20% before they print the ticket for the customer. 2 days later, it's back to $10 and the customer's down 20%. And he doesn't think he paid $1 in commission. He got hosed. He got by 20%. By the collusion of the trading desk, the brokers, the management, the sales manager, the CEO of these firms. They all collude. They all get kickbacks. They all take a piece of the dough. All that money goes into the big fat Christmas bonuses, and the compliance officers at these firms get the biggest Christmas bonus of all at the end of the year because they're the most corrupt. Every single one of these offices has a compliance officer, and those guys sign on every single corrupt act. They all should be in jail.
So let's also focus on the fact of what is hidden and what is hidden that is the truth about the situation, but you don't know. So in the case, say, Americans, especially the Fox News watching sort, were very aggressively for the fact that the kid in Ferguson, Missouri should deserve to die because he stole a cigarette. He stole a cigarette. That's why he's dead. He stole a cigarette. That's why he's dead. Here, we're going to put a number on how much is stolen from you, the American people, by your brokerages. Well, Barack Obama knows this because it's in his memo. They put the losses at between $8 and $17 billion per year. Down to the individual level, what it means for you, the individual. An investor receiving conflicted advice, which you are because all brokerages are conflicted, who expects to retire in 30 years, loses at least 5 to 10% of his or her potential retirement savings due to conflicts, or approximately 1 to 3 years worth of withdrawals during retirement. And yet those same people watching Fox News, and I have a lot of family who watch Fox News and tell me, stop bashing bankers. Bankers are great. Brokers are great. And here they're stealing 3 years of your income. And you're like...
Well, you mentioned pension accounts.
Yeah.
They're known as Wall Street, on Wall Street, as dumb money. And here's the great thing about pension accounts. Let's say I just engage in a transaction that I'm being sued for. And the customer wants to, take us to court, and he's getting all upset, and he won't take the IPO bribe. Here's another recourse that the brokerage can do. They'll bust the trade. They'll put that loss into the error account of the firm, and then they'll call up a pension fund who they know the manager of that fund, and they'll say, you were on the teacher's pension fund, or the fireman's pension fund, or the pension fund for all these municipal workers. It's a huge multi-billion-dollar fund, and they're made up of stupid people that never check their balances. They're dumb, blue-collar workers. Can you just? We're going to dump this losing trade in that account. You're going to take the loss. We need to bury it. And by the way, here's a nice bottle of champagne. Here's a nice hooker. Here's a nice night out in the town. That's what they go for.
Yeah, but and bring it back to the first half of the show with Greece. Here, these individual Americans don't know, but in 30 years' time, when they retire, they're going to have a lot less than what they thought they had. Same with the Greek people. And what's going to happen? Emily Matlis, the BBC is going to hate you. They're going to vilify you. You're the ones that made the bad choices. Not that you were robbed blind for this entire time and nobody protect you, because there's no reason that the brokerages have any sort of reason to have your interest at heart.
Right. Emily would blame the rape victim. But let's be honest about it. She would blame the victim of financial rape. And the number of ways that this goes on, I could go on for another hour and describe 20 or 30 different ways that Wall Street and the City of London, but the point is this, that Greece is the victim of this type of financial rape, financial terrorism, and now, thank God, there is somebody like Iceland who's fighting back, and, you know, we give them our 100% support. And if European ECB won't take their bonds, yeah, Russia will take the bonds, and they'll negotiate with Germany, and they'll use gas as a currency. So we got your back, Greece. We got your back. All right, Stacey, thanks so much. We got to go.
Thanks, Max.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. If you want to find us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.